Velasco was arrested as the world commemorates International Human Rights Day. Hundreds of activists marched to Menjola, Manila early Thursday morning to protest what they say is the government's rampant human rights violations. Groups like Bayan, Anak Bayan, Gabriela, and Kabataan called out the government for its supposed red tagging and arrests of activists.
So when workers across borders support each other's struggles, they send a strong message to capitalists and the government, showing that exploitation won't be tolerated.
I think it is very much a threat to all the capitalists of every country when they see us working together internationally.
Welcome to Spring Radio, a podcast for socialist ideas in action. I'm Lina Elgarawani, Spring member and co-host of the Spring Radio podcast. Today, we're discussing the labor movement in the Philippines, the situation for Filipino political prisoners, and how these struggles connect to labor organizing, indigenous self-determination, and other social justice movements in so-called Canada. According to the United Nations, the Philippines ranks third in the world for jail and prison overcrowding, and has one of the highest number of political prisoners in the world. This political prisoner population is made up of labor organizers, farmer organizers, feminist, indigenous organizers, and even student organizers, some of whom are below the age of 18. An important aspect of the history of resistance and the resulting incarceration of the political prisoners is the martial law in the Philippines, which was imposed by President Marcos Sr. from 1972 to 1981. This period came with intense oppression. Tens of thousands were imprisoned, and thousands of people were killed. Marcos Sr. was in power for 20 years, and during this time, he completely tanked the economy. Although the martial law was lifted in 1981, Marcos Sr. continued his presidency until he was finally ousted in 1986 by a revolution of the Filipino people. Many political prisoners were released and some reforms were made, but unfortunately, the Philippine government today is still not democratic. The leadership of the Philippines for the past many decades has been operating as a puppet government, which is a form of control that the US government, backed by Canada and other countries, imposes on the Filipino people through installing specific presidents that will ensure the ultra-wealthy of Western countries maintain their profit and power. In fact, today, the son of Marcos Sr., Marcos Jr., is now the president of the Philippines. And even since martial law has ended, over 700 people have been arrested, and the legacy of martial law continues. Within the context of so-called Canada, we are not so far removed from the experiences of activists in the Philippines. The very reason behind the necessity of the resistance of the Filipino people is often due to mines that Canada outsources to the Philippines. According to the Canadian Natural Resource Ministry, nearly half of the world's mining companies are headquartered in Canada, and 15% of the mining in the Philippines is Canadian-owned. These Canadian mining projects also involve militarization, worker exploitation, and land grabbing, which are some of the reasons why workers around the world are forced into fighting back against these Canadian corporations and the puppet governments who profit from their oppression. According to the Kalikasan People's Network for the Environment, at least 272 environmental defenders in the Philippines were killed between 2001 and 2019. 1/3 of those killed were indigenous. And the number of political prisoners in the Philippines continues to grow. Spring member Kai Koski interviewed Dennis Velasco, who's an activist, labor organizer, human rights defender, and former political prisoner from the Philippines. He was arrested on the 10th of December of 2020 on the International Human Rights Day, alongside 6 other activists who are known in the Philippines as the HR Day 7. These arrests were all made based on false testimony and fabricated evidence, a common practice to stifle union organizing and political activism in the Philippines. He was released on the 8th March 2022 on International Women's Day, based on the court's decision that his constitutional rights were violated by the state. However, many political prisoners still remain behind bars in the Philippines. Dennis started his trade union work as a labor organizer at the manufacturing hub in the Philippines in the city of Valenzuela, and advocated for workers' rights in several high-profile cases. These included labor rights issues involving workers of the Jollibee burger chain, Philippine long-distance telephone company workers, and the Transport Network Vehicle Services drivers. After his arrest, Dennis and his wife and fellow activist Diane Zapata faced constant harassment from the state authorities that has made them concerned for their safety and their loved ones' safety, so they left for Canada in 2023. Now, Dennis is organizing with Migrante BC, a Filipino migrant workers organization that supports migrants fighting for decent work, permanent status for all, and an end to the exploitation and labor export policies that particularly impact Filipino workers at home and abroad. Here's the conversation between Dennis and Kai.
Hi, everybody. Welcome. And hi, Dennis. Thank you so much for joining us today here on Spring Radio.
Hello.
We first off wanted to ask you about how you got into union organizing. What really got you started in activism?
Oh, first of all, hello Kai and hello Spring Mag, no? And thank you for inviting me for today's discussion. No? I hope to share knowledge with your organization based on my experience as a longtime activist and former political prisoner in the Philippines. No? By way of introduction, I am currently the Secretary General of Migrante BC and also the Deputy Secretary General of Migrante Canada. So maybe regarding your question, I can start it by just giving some information about how I started my activism. No? So basically, my labor activism in the Philippines was deeply rooted in my working class background and experience in growing up. No, so I was raised in a family of a working class in the area called Valenzuela City. Valenzuela City is one of the cities in Metro Manila. No, where there were so many factories, there were so many workers. No, so at young age, I saw workers in the streets and in our communities. No, so this city, Valenzuela City, once called a strike city. So they call it strike city because it has, during my period like 1980s, no, when I was a kid, there were so many strikes, no, streets after streets, no, at that time, no. So yeah, my father was like what I said, my family, I came from a working class background. So my family is also a worker. Like my father is a driver mechanic, and my mother was running or have a small cafeteria or delis. I don't know what's the exact term. No, in the Philippines we call it karinderya, but basically it's small deli, cafeteria style for workers. No, so it's more on just like a fast food. No. So walking when I'm walking to school, I would pass by mounted strikes, no, in the streets, and witness firsthand the challenge of the Filipino workers, no, like meager wages, lack of job security, contractualizations, and even union busting. But actually, my activism began to shape during my college years when I joined political organization in one of the state university in Manila in 1990s. No, so I joined a political organization. The name is Students for National Democracy. No, that's an organization advocating for democratic and rights and welfare of the students, like calling for higher state subsidy for education, fighting against tuition increases, no? And also, as a political organization, we also address issues like broader people's issues, like impacting workers, oil prices hikes, no, price commodity increases, and also human rights violation, corruption, and more. So it's more on a political organization, but a student-based, a university-based organization. So yeah, to cut short, my organization at that time has a program. We call it like integrating with unions and workers. So during our breaks, we go to the factories. We go directly to the workers, and if there is a mounted picket lines, we go there and we have set a discussions, no, sharing of experience, no. So basically, that's what integration means, no. So for me, it's easy to understand the plight of the workers because me as coming from a working class family, you know. So yeah, after a long years of organizing in students like 1990s up to 2000, this integration led me to join a organization in the labor movement in 2016. I joined the Defend Jobs Philippines. Then eventually they appointed me as a national campaign officer. No, and since then, I directly go to the factories. I help them build their, or I help them discuss about their rights, labor rights, and then I help them build the unions, no, while the building unions in the Philippines is not that easy because it's very dangerous in the Philippines, like even in their formative stage, they can harass organizers, like trade union organizers going to the workers, no, a workers house or workplace, no. So basically, that's it, like a long time student activist, and then I decided eventually to join the workers movement.
Amazing. Thank you so much. That's
Mhm.
really amazing too that you literally grew up in Strike City. That's wild. I wonder, what are some of the lessons that you've learned in your efforts as a union organizer, and how do you think these lessons apply to the current labor movement here in so-called Canada?
One of the key lessons I've learned in trade union organizing is that workers' political consciousness often begins with addressing workplace issues. No, so our campaigns should focus on these immediate concerns while connecting them, the workers, to a broader government policies that affect workers as a whole. No, while generally unions are traditionally formed to fight for workers' economic demands, genuine unionism goes beyond achieving economic gains. No, so it must. What does this mean? It must link, or economic gains must link to the struggle to a broader political questions. No, so workers should not stop on once they secure economic victories. Instead, they must push for systemic change, no? So unions play a crucial role in helping workers realize their power in transforming a society. So this involves educating workers through the union, showing how workplace issues from government labor stems from government labor policies, and understanding the need to address these issues from a political perspective. You know, in the Philippines, we have this what we call yellow unionism, no? I don't know if you're familiar with this, but basically, yellow unionism refers to a labor union that prioritize the interests of employers or the government over the workers they represent. No? So these unions are often seen as company controlled or government aligned unions. No? So, and they tend to suppress workers' militancy, and by discouraging them to not to do a strike or resistance to exploitative practices, no? So yellow unions avoid challenging the root causes of worker exploitation, and they're pretty much more focused on short-term economic gains rather than systemic change, no? They may also collaborate with the management. Actually, most of the time in the experience in the Philippines, they always collaborate, no? So instead of siding with the workers, they act as a mediator. So it's very unique because they are unions, but they are actually acting as a mediator rather than for the representation of the workers. No, so basically, because of that concept, the true potential of unionism as a tool for advancing workers' rights. Basically, the yellow unions undermine it. No, so in the broader political landscape in the Philippines, no, yellow unionism is linked to unions that act as tool for maintaining the status quo. So rather than advancing genuine interests of the working class, these unions often bargain for minimal benefits, no, while refusing to confront the larger issues like neoliberal policies, labor exploitation, and political repression. No? So if there is a yellow union, there is also an opposite of this. No, it's called genuine militant unionism, often associated with national democratic or revolutionary labor organizations in the Philippines. No, so these unions are actively fight for workers' rights, not just economically, but politically, meaning they challenge oppressive system and advocating for social change. No, so genuine unions in the Philippines push for workers' full emancipation, not only getting demands from the work from a manager or a particular factory, but the full emancipation of the workers. No, so they connect the workplace struggle into much larger national issues such as imperialism, neoliberal policies, and government corruption. So examples of militant unions in the Philippines is the Kilusang Mahi Uno or May First movement, no? So which stands in stark contrast to yellow unions, no? So in the Philippines, they brand or the government brands them at radical, no, radical unions, because if you have yellow, the genuine and militant union is red. No? So yeah, no. So these unions understand that workplace issues are intertwined with broader political and economic system, and they fight not just for higher wages or better working condition, but for structural change that empowers workers and dismantles exploitation at its core. But historically, before the KMU was established in 1980, workers organizers at that time, like the early 1970s in the Philippines, no, operated or organized within the ranks of the yellow unions. As we all know, that yellow unions are actually set up also by the capitalists, no. So at that time, workers organizer has employ a tactic, no, a correct tactic of how to organize the workers within those big yellow unions, no? So they use the term called work within tactic, no? So the militant organizer of workers integrate with these workers that belongs to yellow union. So as the worker become politicized, they began to connect their economic demands to more broader political issues, no? Eventually, realizing the need for a genuine trade unionism. So basically, they continued to raise political consciousness within these unions, within these yellow unions, until they decided to, form a separate, genuine, and militant union. No, so I mean, here in Canada, when I first arrived, because I always have an interest in how the union works here. No, actually, the first time I arrived here, I'm looking for a work in the union, but before that, I study first the situation of the unions here, and I've noticed that there is a large membership of unions here, although majority are still do not belong to a union, but basically the unions here are relatively big compared to Philippines, no? And then most of the unions here, I observe, they're primarily focused on economic demands, no? I don't want to say that they are yellow unions, but in context, if they only pursue economic demands, basically that's the concept of the yellow unionism, no? Whereas many of these unions cooperate with politicians, no? And then some politicians even came from union ranks, no? Like I heard in one of the, oh really? So they treat union as a stepping stone into a political career, no? So however, this doesn't mean that we shouldn't organize workers within these unions, no? So in fact, there is a strong basis to engage with workers, politicize them, and develop a genuine militant union movement here as well. So basically, it's more on tactic of how to organize the working class inside these unions, no? And then have a political discourse, and then they will come to realize that there is indeed a need to build a genuine and militant union here in Canada. Yeah.
Thank you so much. That's so helpful to hear, I think, for a lot of our listeners of, really how in the Philippines you have managed to create that militant union. And also for context, if I understand correctly, yellow is the color of the Liberal Party in the Philippines, yes?
Oh,
So,
yes.
so it's kind of like liberal unions. And unfortunately, the Liberals have taken the color red, but perhaps here we can call it the real red unions.
The river. Yeah.
Yes, so we mentioned this in our introduction to our interview here, but the Philippines ranks third in the world for jail and prison overcrowding, and it has one of the highest number of political prisoners in the world. So we were wondering if you can share the reason the Philippines has this many political prisoners, and also a little bit about your experience as a political prisoner.
First of all, it's important to understand the definition of political prisoners. No, so political prisoners are individuals arrested, detained, and imprisoned for taking action based on their socio-political beliefs or faith. No, so they are unjustly denied their freedom and their constitutional right to due process. So many political prisoners experience various forms of torture, and some are held incommunicado or days of without contact, like deprived of contact with their families, lawyers, and even doctors. No, so they endure harsh and unsanitary prison conditions, and many remain in jail for extended periods due to the slow pace of court proceedings. No, so government often attempted to downplay the term political prisoner. So by labeling them as persons deprived of liberty. No, so it's important to differentiate between political prisoners and person deprived with liberty. It's more on the use of the government. No, and then once we establish that, what's the reason? Because the government always equating them with criminal serving sentences for actual crimes. No, so how political prisoners come, however political prisoners comes from different walks of life, like there are ordinary citizens coming from workers, peasant, indigenous people, and women, youth activists, and human rights defenders, and leaders of organizations advocating for the rights of marginalized and impoverished. No, so basically, political prisoners are victims of government repression, which is common response of the government once there is a social dissent, political activism in defense of human rights. No, so we must be aware of that definition between political prisoner and persons deprived of liberty. No, and in the Philippines, no, for now, as of June 30, there are 755 political prisoners, no, in various detention facilities all over the Philippines. No, so 103 of them are actually arrested under Marcos regime from the start of 2022. So more or less around 2 years, no, he already got 103 political prisoners in jail, and then among the prisoners, 102 are also elderly, so 90 are ill, like problems of in their health. No, and then 147 are women, came from the women ranks, and there's also 15, around 15 peace consultant and 4 minors. No, so basically 700, almost 800 is a big number of political prisoners in the Philippines. No, so the context is every government does not want to be labeled that they have political prisoners. So that's the reason they always use the term PDL. But why the question is, why is there political prisoners in the Philippines? No? So basically, there is an ongoing protracted armed conflict in the Philippines with deep socioeconomic and political roots, no? So there is a social discontent, there is a political dissent, no? And then these organizations that are keep on organizing, they are met by strong fascist repression, no, of the government, no? So this government blatantly violate people's rights, no? They do the trump up charges, illegal arrest, imprisonment, torture, and then unjust conviction. But actually, it's not only this kind of way of suppressing the people. They also employ like extrajudicial killings, no, assassinations, and even the forced disappearances, no. So they employ different tactics just to suppress those uh, people who wants to, to raise concerns about the government policy, no. So basically, the objective of the government is to hide, no, that the true extent of illegal arrest and detention suffered by political activists, no. So they are not to be made public as political prisoners, and so as not to leave the damaging mark on the Philippine government's for human rights record, no. So yeah, so that's the general term about the political prisoners in PDL and the reasons why there is a growing number of political prisoners in the Philippines. No, so about the situation of the political prisoners, aside from being arrested and detained on trump-up charges, political prisoners endures the worst condition inside the jail. No, so the one thing that you are being arrested for trump-up charges, and then when you are in jail, you will suffer the most, worst condition inside the jail. No, so they have overcrowded cells with poor ventilation, meager and often inedible food rations. So limited access to clean water, healthcare, and abuse from jail guards. No, from my own experience, I saw firsthand how dire the situation inside the jails can be. No, so to put into perspective, imagine a room about 20 square meters in size, like it is here in Canada, like a small apartment bedroom. So imagine 70 detainees crammed into that space, barely able to lie down. And if you are just newly arrested, you will be the least priority to sleep. So if you are just new, like you will try to sleep like standing or just because you can't lie down because it was so very cramped, no? Like there were so many detainees, no? So the overcrowding restricts movement and makes even basic needs like sleeping, eating, or using the bathroom a challenge, no? So to make matter worse, no, if you need to use washroom, like in my what I've experienced directly, you have to ask the permission from a prison guard who might deny it based on their mood, no? So it depends on their mood if they allow you to go to washroom just to urinate or I've seen inmates forced to urinate and defecate in their pants because they were not allowed to go to the washroom. So this is my particular experience in Camp Karingal in Quezon City, where I was detained for 6 months, and then after that they transferred me in much bigger jail, like around 400 detainees, which also has the same condition. No? So the food rations are equally appalling, like consisting of almost a rotten food that they force you to eat because you have no money, like you are obligated to what they serve, just get it and eat it, no? And during my time in jail, it was during also the COVID-19 pandemic. So all of us are quickly contracted with virus. There were no health protocols in place, and new detainees were continually brought in, further overcrowding the cells and worsening the spread of disease. No, so this condition still exists up to this day. And then there were so many. Aside from this, there were so many stories of the torture, like if like in my case, there is a situation that the police always held their drinking spree, and after they are and if they drunk, they just call one of the prisoner and they just play the prisoner as a toy, and then they just torture it, no. So I mean, that's a normal sight inside the prisons, no. Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing your experience, Dennis, and also just helping people understand why there are so many political prisoners in the Philippines. Yeah, so as you mentioned, there are still almost 800 political prisoners still incarcerated in the Philippines currently. And today, we specifically wanted to focus on your friend Maush,
Yeah.
who's also a fellow labor organizer and who's still in prison today. Can you tell us a little bit about his case?
Yeah, Mauj Maga is actually, he is a close friend of mine. So, and fellow activist from our college days, no, in 1990s. He was also a trade union organizer. He was arrested in 2018 on trump up charges, no. He faced like 8 charges, including murder, attempted murder, in places where he's never been to, no. And also, he's also been slapped with illegal possession of firearms and explosive. No, so he was initially convicted of illegal possession of firearms and explosive and sentenced to 12 years in prison. So, however, an appeal successfully overturned this conviction after several years of incarceration. Imagine that. So, after 7 years, the Court of Appeals just ruled in favor of Mauch, like, okay, uh, uh, conviction is now reversed, but actually he's been in jail for 7 years. And then illegal possession of firearms and explosive, you can be jailed like 8 to 12 years. And then if they put explosive in your possession, or in your case, you can be convicted for life conviction, no. So life sentence, no. So in the case of Mauch, no, when the state security forces knows that he got the favorable decisions from Court of Appeals and the reversal of the decision of conviction, they just slap him another 8 cases, no. So yeah, so they serve the warrant of arrest while Mauch is in jail. So so I mean, the government tactic is just to let you rot, prolong your detention, no. And then, in the Philippines, the case hearing is so very slow. Like, in your one case, you can get a hearing of 2 to 3 in 1 year. So imagine that. And that hearing is just actually a presentation of evidences or witnesses. It will take long. Like in the case of illegal possession of firearms and explosives, it takes 7 years. So imagine if you have 8 cases, no. So yeah, and actually Mauch, actually before the arrest of Mauch, we have a meeting, like we are like just having a conversation about her father-in-law that also been arrested, no. His father-in-law is actually a peace consultant. They live in the same house, no. And then months after the arrest of the father-in-law, then they arrest also Mauch, no. And then, so imagine the situation that Mauch and the family suffer because of this fascist attack of the Philippine government, no. So yeah, up to now, Mauch is still languishing in jail and still awaiting trial for these cases. And now from 2018, it's now 2024, and still they haven't finished, no, at least 2 cases, no. So yeah, Mauch Maga is the same as age like me. He's also 40, around 47, 46, no. So yeah, so that's Mauch, no.
Yes, thank you for sharing about Mauch. And I also think about how, as much as the situation here in so-called Canada with political prisoners is very different. The idea of just putting charges after charges as a kind of tactic to keep you in court and to keep your case ongoing is also used here. I think about Slato and Shay and Jay, who are 3 Indigenous land defenders, and they're currently going through a trial case that's from things from all the way, in 2020, and it's still going on today, and it will continue. And it's really a way to bring down the morale as well of people and of the movement to maintain people's trials as ongoing. So although, the situation here is very different and it might seem like we're so far removed from these experiences here, it is actually, in fact, often Canadian mining projects that are pushing more militarization onto people's lands and also further worker exploitation. And then, of course, further arrests of labor organizers and of activists. So can you tell us a little bit more about how we can fight against the Canadian state's oppression of Filipino people?
First, we must put this perspective. We must expose the Canadian government's policy or complicity in the oppression of the Filipino people, direct or indirect, as it is aligned with the US-backed Philippine government. So, for example, this year, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau just invited President Marcos to celebrate the 75th anniversary of diplomatic relations between Canada and the Philippines. So their discussion will focus on Asian-Canada strategic partnership, Indo-Pacific strategy, and regional security issues, including China's actions in the West Philippine Sea. So this collaboration does not reflect genuine friendship, so towards the Philippines, but rather reveals Canada's economic interest in the country, in the Philippines. So these policies are part of a broader neoliberal agenda that often leads to increased repression. So whenever there is resistance, it is met with fascist attacks on the people aimed at suppressing their struggles and maintaining control. Like in the Philippines, if there is a mining project in one of the provinces, it's automatically been backed by the military forces. So if the people organize an action or they form an organization against those mining that destroys their livelihood, and then the Philippine government uses military forces to suppress. So that's the reason I'm saying that if there is an economic, situation like mining, there's always repression is always a twin factor. So Canada also has been involved in a defense cooperation with the Philippines, particularly in recent, I think, January 2024, the 2 countries, Canada and Philippines, signed a memorandum of understanding on defense cooperation, which actually may eventually lead to a broader military agreements similar to other ones in the Philippines with the US. We call it the Visiting Forces Agreement. So the Canadian government wants the same agreement, like Visiting Forces Agreement, but in the benefit of the Canada. So that's one of the agenda that they will talk in this year. And also, although the deal focuses on military training, peacekeeping operations, and disaster response, Canada also supports the Philippines through maritime surveillance technologies. So even the Canada wants to put his finger on maritime issues, like the aggression of China. So they have the same position as the position of the US. So so while Canada has not been known for a large scale arms sales like the US, the Canada has facilitated some defense related support such as helicopters and military equipment used by Philippine forces. However, there had been concern about Canadian companies that indirectly contributing to human rights abuses as seen in general arms trade practices, including those involving other nations. And so if Canada is actually indeed interested in helping the Filipino people, human rights and social and economic justice should be at the forefront. If they truly want to build a diplomatic friendly relation with the Philippines, no? Canadians or settlers of the so-called Canada should form a solidarity against militarization all over the world, no? So we must have a thorough discussion about the deep participation of Canada in the affairs of the Philippines, no? But of course, the Canadian government is actually different with the U.S. government, which is more blatant. Like in the Canada, they can always use that they are friendly, they are just respecting human rights, but based on actual situation, actual conditions in our country, that is a lie. So forces like the progressive forces here working in Canada should expose this scheme of the government. Yeah.
Yes, very well said of just how, the US is so blatant, right? In the force that it uses. And so it can't really hide. Whereas, Canada does the same human rights violations, same militarization projects, and, might look a little bit different, but for the people who it's affecting, it is no different, And so it's very important for people in so-called Canada to know that, because for the rest of the world where all of these Canadian mining projects are, they're not fooled, right? But sometimes people here in this country are fooled into the idea that Canada is somehow better than the US.
But they are practically the same, right?
Exactly. We just follow the US's orders. Yes, I think, as the imperialist project continues, we are seeing the rise even here of political prisoners. Leonard Peltier, who is in the so-called US, he's been in prison for almost 50 years now. And actually recently, we just saw the chief of the Tayu clan, Chief Tile of the Wet'suwet'en Nation. He was put under house arrest after protecting his territory from the CGL pipeline. So, this is very much still affecting people here, even if it is affecting more people across the world, such as in the Philippines. But this is going to continue. And as these movements, this movement to oppose these for-profit extractive projects grows, how can we in so-called Canada support Filipino movement for real democracy and lasting peace? And also, what can we learn from Filipino organizers when it comes to supporting Indigenous land defenders here on Turtle Island?
So in the Philippines, many Indigenous people are also peasant farmers, no? So the country is home to an estimated 14 to 17 million Indigenous people all over the Philippines, no? So a large portion of these communities relies on agriculture, farming, and subsistence livelihood to survive. So they cultivate ancestral lands, they have lived on and worked for generations, no? In this sense, the indigenous people in the Philippines share common struggle with the broader peasant class. So that's the number one, that's the important point that we need to put perspective first, that majority of the indigenous people in the Philippines is actually belongs to the peasant class, no? So though they share common struggle with broader peasant class, no, particularly regarding land rights, resources, and resistance to land grabbing by the corporation or the government, no. So indigenous peoples in the Philippines are actively involved in the national liberation movement through various means, no. So they have a long history of resisting colonial and imperial rule, which continues in their modern struggle up to now. So many indigenous groups join a broad alliance. In the Philippines, there is a broad alliance of indigenous group. The name is Sandugo, no, Sandugo. So actually, Sandugo Alliance, or if we translate it, it's the nearest is the, like, the blood compact. It's like like that, like their brotherhood through by means of doing a blood compact. That's the meaning of Sandugo. So it is an alliance. It's a bigger alliance of different indigenous groups in the Philippines, and they form Sandugo, no, an alliance, no. And there are also some indigenous people like engage in more radical groups, no? Like national liberation movements like the CPP, NPA, no, in the Philippines, no. So advocating for land reform and social justice. So in all different aspect of struggle, indigenous peoples are always at the forefront, no. Yeah, especially in the context of Philippine struggle, no. Basically, they also want to campaign about their protection of ancestral domain, no? And then uh, these ancestral domains are now subjected by exploitation from companies, precisely the mining companies, no, and the government through the government. So, in addition to this effort, indigenous peoples work to preserve their language, traditions, and ways of life from being lost or eroded. So, they form alliances with other social movements to strengthen their impact and achieve common goals. No, so overall, their involvement reflects a commitment to their unique cultural identities, no? While contributing to the broader struggle for national freedom and social change, no? So indigenous people in the Philippines has a strong history of joining people's fight against colonizer from legal struggle up to armed struggle. So and up to now, the national liberation movements of the national liberation movement in the Philippines, there is a study that majority or almost many of the indigenous people living in the countryside, no, of which the majority of the people, the Filipino people are there, are joining the national liberation movements, no. So yeah, so even the national liberation movement has a clear in the Philippines, no, includes a specific program for the indigenous people, that is the right to self determination, which is also part of a broader democratic framework. So the difference of indigenous people's movement there is that the indigenous people are part of a much larger movement. So it's not only a movement of themselves, but they just unite with the workers, student, and the peasant, and they have a clear program of action. So here in Canada, I think there is a particular situation that needs to be studied, like because I'm not that familiar, but basically they have the right, no, they also have the the progressive thinking of how to fight colonialism and how to teach themselves to govern in their based on their rights here in Canada. So there is a potential that there is a need to establish a movement that will pursue those interests for the people.
It's so great to hear about Sanduko and just the incredible alliance there between many different Indigenous nations. And we have seen that here on Turtle Island at various times in history, but I do get excited about that idea of, what it might mean to have a strong alliance of the nations across so-called Canada who are Indigenous, and in that way also be able to join forces with settlers and what that might do for our movements. And as much as it is a little bit different here because, peasants or, farm workers that are here are often not Indigenous, it's often settlers. And so there is not that strong connection there. A lot of Indigenous people here are workers. And so there's already such a strong, connection there just because of how settler colonialism and capitalism have, forced Indigenous people into urban centers and into being part of the working class, right?
Yeah.
So we have such strong alliances to be made here to build a much more powerful movement with a very strong political unity that we see in the movement in the Philippines. So you are really leading the way in that way. So I do want to just thank you so much for your time, Dennis. I have one more question for you. Just to finish the interview, I wanted to ask you why international solidarity is so important in the labor movement. You mentioned that genuine union movements need to go beyond economic gain. And I'm very curious, why you think it's so important for the labor movement to be connected to anti-imperialism.
International solidarity is essential in the labor movement for several reasons. No, one, it's the issue of global exploitation. So capitalists are taking advantage of workers across different countries, no, seeking the cheapest labor. Solidarity unites workers to prevent capitalists from pushing downwards their wages, no. So and then also the worst working conditions, pitting them against each other, no. So there were times that the government, or in general the capitalist, wants to divide the whole working class, but actually they always fail to do that because of the historical role of the workers in uniting with other workers in other countries, no. So what unites them is, number one, global exploitation. It is a fight between capitalists and bourgeoisie over working class, or versus the working class, no. So there's always a common goal. So it's more on the thinking of, in the whole world, it's a contradiction between bourgeoisie, especially the large bourgeoisie represented by the capitalists, and the working class, no, on the other side. So number two, there's a common struggle, no. So I mean, workers in different places, in different countries, faces similar problems, no? Low wage, the question of security of tenure, unsafe working conditions, and even union busting or attacks on unions, no. So by connecting, they can share strategic support to each other. They can share, like what we are doing. You can share the experiences. We can develop ways of how to effectively form and organize a union, but not only a simple economic union, but a solid, genuine militant union. No, so we can just share some tactics on how to do it. No, and then three, the context of fighting neoliberal policies. No, that started from 1980s. No, so the capitalists are now, the imperialist blocs are now keep on thinking how to prevent the world war by doing policies like globalization and neoliberal. But as our analysis about imperialism, it always leads to a war, no. It always leads to people's resistance, no, and then pave the condition to establish socialism, no. So basically, there is a policy, the neoliberal policy, that is plaguing the whole world, no, even in the Philippines and even in the most advanced countries, no. So policies like deregulation, privatization, no, affects worldwide workers worldwide, no. So international solidarity helps the labor movement unite to resist, no, these harmful policies on global scale. Like I remember in the Philippines, every May or every May Labor Day, we also have a program like International Solidarity Alliance, of which the KMU, the May First Movement, invites different unions to go in the Philippines and then see what is happening in the Philippines. No, so that's an example of building solidarity. No, so we always we need to have that kind of multiple relations, no, just to strengthen worker solidarity, no. And then four, maybe we can say that when worker support for repressed worker, so I mean the fascist attack, no. So when workers are mistreated or repressed in one country, international solidarity brings attention and pressure on government and corporation to respect their rights. So it's very important that the organizations here in Canada or related to Philippines help to expose human rights violations, no, especially many of the political prisoners also belong to workers, no, working class, no. So we have cases of union leader being harassed, union leader being killed, union leader being experienced forced disappearances, no? So if the organization in different country voice out, no, the government of the Philippines are obliged to, to explain, or they are being exposed of their human rights record, no? So we need to always release statements, no, for the workers that are being attacked, no. The fifth, maybe we can say, that is strength in unity. So when workers across borders support each other's struggles, no, they send a strong message to capitalists and the governments, showing that exploitation won't be tolerated. So, for now, it's unlike like in when there is a socialist country, there is a capitalist camp, imperialist bloc, and the imperialist camp, and then there is also a socialist bloc. But for now, we need to further strive in order to build the condition to build those socialist countries, no? So we can start it by showing how the workers' organizations support each other, no? So it's a matter of time, but because there's always a favorable condition, objective condition of they repress or they exploit workers, workers will always fight back, no? So there's a strength in unity, and I think lastly, if there is international solidarity, that will serve to make the labor movement stronger, ensuring that workers around the world can fight for their rights together, rather than alone, no? As Karl Marx famously said, "Workers of the world, unite. You have nothing to lose but your chain." Thank you very much, Kai.
Thank you, Dennis. So well said. Yes. And I think it is very much a threat to all the capitalists of every country when they see us working together internationally. International solidarity is so powerful in that way. And it's also why, we need to, in so-called Canada, be calling for the release of political prisoners, calling for the release of all elderly and sick political prisoners in the Philippines, and also calling for the release of labor organizer political prisoners like your friend Mauch. And, it really does work. That international solidarity works. Recently, we saw Gerardo de la Pena finally, the country's oldest political prisoner be released. And that was also very much due to the solidarity that we saw here in so-called Canada. So we need to keep pushing for that here and making those connections between our workers' struggles internationally. So thank you again for joining us. It was so wonderful having you.
And I'm hoping that we can have more discussion in the future, so that this is an initial discussion, and then maybe we can have more issues to tackle. So yeah,
absolutely. Yes.
Thank you very much, Spring Mag, Spring Radio.
Thank you, Dennis. See you.
Thank you to Dennis Velasco for sharing his insights and experiences with Spring Magazine. You can follow Migrante BC or Migrante Canada on Instagram at Migrante BC and @Migrante Canada. To learn how to support the release of political prisoners like labor organizer Mauch Maga, look up the organization Karapatan in the Philippines, and find your local member organizations of International Coalition for Human Rights in the Philippines, or ICHRP Canada. You can also look out for upcoming actions across so-called Canada on September 21st of 2024, which is the 52nd anniversary of the martial law in the Philippines. This episode was produced on the traditional territory of many nations, including the Musqueam, Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Coast Salish nations. It was produced by Kai Koski, Kylie McPhee, and me, Lina El-Garawani, with original music by Benjamin Belgan. To read and listen to more from Spring, and to find out how you can join the Spring Socialist Network, please go to springmag.ca.